All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. This is a Kiss-related podcast by the board, for the board. We hope that you enjoy. Welcome to episode 299 of the KissFAQ Podcast. I'm your host, Julian Gill, admin on the KissFAQ message board. Today we've got the United Nations of our KISS panel going. We've got Daniel from Sweden.
Hello.
We got David Donnelly from the UK.
Hi, chaps.
And, of course, from the Great White North, Canada, the mighty Marcus Almighty. Mark, good to see you again.
Greetings, my friends.
So, gents, it's always good to convene the congregation to talk about KISS. But I do want to just check in with each one of you as to how you're doing in this time of challenge. Daniel, Sweden seems to be the real outlier at the moment. Not a tremendous amount of cases, not a tremendous amount of restrictions being reported in at least the international press. How are you guys doing there?
Well, we're comparing to the other countries in Central Europe, we're doing just fine. I think we have like 200 cases where people have died in Sweden, so that's not a lot. But there are restrictions, of course. I work at a school, and there's a whole lot of restrictions on how you serve food and how you stand in line and where you eat and all that kind of stuff. And you can't have gatherings with more than 50 people. So that cancels all activities when it comes to like sports and music events and cinema and that sort of stuff. So it's a big thing, but not when it comes to people dying.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's fortunate. Moving down the world to the United Kingdom. David, how are you coping at this time? I know the British government did finally put in restrictions, and today I would have been flying back to the US had I made it out to the UK. So
yeah.
How are you doing wherever you are?
Well, sorry I missed you. Well, I'm personally doing all right. I mean, we've got a restriction on no more than 2 people in public. And it's, but my sister and my niece are both working at the big hospital where I live, so it's nerve-wracking. My sister said she's quite scared every time she goes into work, but she goes in every day. And I've just been coping, but I'm just thankful that I've got a large record collection. And I don't mean to make light of it. I'm genuinely thankful because I know people friends of mine who their whole thing is going out and stuff. They don't really sort of collect anything and stuff. So I can picture them just wondering what the heck to do. But I felt a bit lethargic from time. I had a shave this morning, and I feel like I should be up for some sort of award. But I'm trying to sort of keep some sort of semblance of busyness. My house is spotless though.
Yeah, there's only so many times you can clean it, though, isn't there?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's one of those situations. I was reading the BBC this morning, and I saw they were flying drones in Derby, catching dog walkers.
Yeah. It's very 1984 in terms of the book, because it's kind of the drones have got speakers in them, haven't they? And it says, go back inside, go indoors, But the thing is, like Daniel said, we're up to 1,400 people dead now, and so really. If I can't go, I mean, as a musician, I'm fucked. It's like festival season is usually my big season, and it's supposed to be heading off to Belgium in 3-4 weeks, but it's not going to happen because it's pulled. So it's it's a shame. But like Daniel quite rightly said, if it saves one person, everyone just sort of doing the right thing, then do the right thing is what we've got to do. And the thing is, we've got each other, we've got Skype, we've got, it's, you can keep in touch. It's not as good as face-to-face chats, but, you do what you can just to try and hopefully snuff this thing out as quickly as possible. So I hope everyone out there in my country and all of yours is are doing all right.
Yep, just stay away from each other. Now's the time to be an introvert. Woo!
Yeah,
Mark,
yeah.
Let's go to Canada for a quick update on how are you doing? No doubt you're keeping yourself occupied writing music.
Oh, I'm keeping very occupied. I mean, to be honest, there's been moments during this time that I've been so wrapped up in doing things that if I didn't go into the living room and turn on the news and realize that, oh, there's been another 200 cases added in Ontario, I wouldn't even know probably what the heck is going on half the time. But, it is a serious thing. On my street where I walk my dog Jackie, it's like a complete ghost town. Like every once in a blue moon, you'll see somebody step outside and, go to somewhere, because everything here is pretty much closed. Restaurants closed, everything closed. The only thing they're allowing is for like takeout. Like you can order like food from the restaurant, but you have to pick it up, or you have groceries that are delivered now, which is good for me because, having my elderly mom with me here, I can't risk anything with her. She's 75 years old. If I even bring a smidge of that in here, then it's going to be bad news bears for her, right? So I'm keeping track of things, bills through the internet and stuff like that, just trying to keep away from people. But at the same time, I think Dave is absolutely right. And so is Daniel. We have to be smart about this stuff and, keep our distance. The more we do that, the quicker we'll get rid of it and we can get back to a normal semblance of life. And I'll tell you one thing I noticed really quickly. The air quality here has gotten so much better. It's unbelievable because I live by a highway. Just behind my house is a big major highway. Quiet, maybe a car here and there. And when you go outside, you can take a huge breath and it's like, wow, I don't remember breathing this kind of fresh air in who knows how long, Even my dog's like outside rolling around on her back, like happy, with the way things are outside. But, maybe with this little bit of a disaster that's happening, maybe there'll be some ray of sunshine that may come out of it. Maybe something pollution-wise may improve because of it. Who knows? So let's always try to look for the silver lining, my friends.
Always look on the bright side of life.
That's right. Julian, I've just got to say this before you move on, is that I finally treated myself to this.
Ah, brilliant.
And I tell you, I can't recommend it more. Listen to it with this. It's just great. I mean, I know it's a weird concept for people that you can own 4 albums for 42 years and, not playing for a while or just thing. But the pleasure that I got just putting each album on and just going to the appropriate pages and just looking through. He was such a humble bloke. I know you always, it's another book I put out, but it's a wonderful thing.
Well, cheers.
So I just wanted to say thanks for that because that has burnt some hours. I'll tell you that.
Well, I appreciate that. That is very kind of you. All right, so before we move on, I do just want to say stay home, listen to podcasts, discover new podcasts, keep yourself healthy so that we can protect our first responders, nurses, doctors, those who are caring for the critically sick. The fewer people they have to come into contact with, the healthier they're going to stay because they're putting themselves at risk every single time they go to work, and we thank them for doing that job for us. We don't get taken care of otherwise. Let's get into today. Everyone's coping with this situation in different ways. Bruce has been sharing a ton of his riffs and talking about his songs on Instagram and Twitter, which has been very entertaining. Paul Stanley now has gotten into the act and has done his first 2 kind of songs and story sessions. He's spoken about Love Gun the other night, and last night he got an acoustic guitar out, told us all about Martin acoustics and the importance of those to him, and went into a performance
Every Time I Look at You.
Every Time I Look at You. And I wanted to get your guys' opinion of, how these guys are doing. I think Gene's sharing some sketches that he's doing to keep himself occupied. So Daniel, what was your take on Paul and his songs and stories, and what would you like to hear from him if you got to be his boss for one day and say, hey, Paul?
I'd like that. Well, I think it was a great thing of Paul to do. I guess if I could pick and choose, I would actually like him to talk about for example, Lick It Up sessions with Vinnie Vincent. I know he has a lot of hatred, I guess, towards that guy. But if he could say something nice about Vinnie Vincent and Vinnie Vincent's talents when it comes to songwriting, because most of the time they just say, well, Vinnie's a talented guy. Who he got the keys to the kingdom, but he hang himself when he got them. But I would like to hear in detail, what did Vinny do that was so great? What kind of, how was it when they, worked on a song? Who did what? That would be really interesting, but I'm not sure he will do that. Another thing is, I'd like to hear a bit more about Forever, how it came about that he started writing with Michael Bolton, and what he thought of the success of that song, because it was quite some time since they had a hit in the US. So was he surprised by the the critical acclaim and the sales of that song? What did it do for them? How did it affect the touring that they did or afterwards? All that kind of stuff would be real nice to hear. I'm more into hearing the stories than actually hearing him play the songs, because I've already heard perfect versions. So I would like him to talk a bit more, speak about the minutia. And if I could pick one more thing, I guess. Anything from the non-makeup era, because they haven't talked a lot about that. So anything from, Asylum, Animal Eyes, maybe even Crazy Nights. I think it would be cool. So there's a lot of stories to be told. So let's hope he does that.
Yeah, and he did go into a little bit of the minutia with Love Gun. He was playing some Zeppelin for reference and talking about Albert King, talking about the blues songs from which that kind of that concept came from, that he borrowed and adapted into crafting Love Gun, which I loved. I mean, you remember Booker, and the original songwriters who did The Hunter, and I loved being right that I figured it was the Albert King version, not the Zeppelin. That was kind of his entry point to that. David, what about you? I mean, as a musician, do you get a special sort of appreciation out of Paul sitting there with a guitar talking about his music?
Yeah. And I mean, one thing I really liked, did you all see that thing? Is it Ernie Ball strings that he uses?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
guitar strings. Yeah. I mean, that was a precursor to this, and I thought that was great, just whipping out the riffs, and kind of, obviously, people like me just as like watching his hands, and just to make sure that when we've been playing them, we're playing them in the right place or whatever, when you have a crack at something. And so on that level, I mean, I'd like him to keep going. I'd like him to do like just a vocal and guitar version of Hard Luck Woman, for instance, because it's kind of his song. And I think it'd be interesting to hear, a Paul Stanley version of that, nice. And then maybe tell us also about, said he wrote it for Rod Stewart. It is very Maggie May, isn't it? And so it'd be interesting to know, how did that all come about? What did he actually put it forward? And I've always wanted to ask a bit more about, because the last gig in makeup in Brazil, it fascinates me. I love that live footage, but I'd love to know what made you go out in like a jeans and t-shirt almost. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, what was going through your head? Did you know it was? Were you just kind of preparing in a way for when you go out in your civilian clothes, as it were, or what was that about? I mean, that whole trip, that Rio footage and stuff is amazing, and it's I've never played anywhere that big, but I have toured Brazil, and they are nuts. And I can just imagine the noise coming off that crowd would have been extraordinary. You can see them steaming, and it is that sort of thing. I didn't do any outdoor places in Brazil, but they are, the minute you kick off, it's just like a wall of energy. I'd just like to hear a bit more about that, because it's almost like a little sort of tail end bit where it's gone down in history as being a bit of a downer, even though it was like the biggest audience they'd had. They knew that, the axe was coming down, as it were, but I love that. I love all that sort of stuff. But, I'd love to hear him do and explain things like Wouldn't You Like to Know Me and It's All Right, and, that sort of thing. I'd love to hear more about what they were about, But I mean, thankfully, because we've got all these books, but things like is it Kiss and Makeup that's got a song by song thing, and then there's the box set stuff. So that, I mean, there's quite a lot of descriptions about Kiss songs and what have you. But yeah, I'd like to know a bit more about those. Those are my favourite,
Yeah,
I know it's a lot to ask, but I would actually like to hear him be a bit more critical of his own stuff.
Yeah.
At times it feels like he's almost a robot. Talking about how good it is. It will actually make him look a bit more humane. I mean, show him your weak stuff as well. Maybe talking about, well, this song wasn't the greatest one, and this is what I was trying to do.
That's not his style.
I was going to say,
like
good.
to hear that, because he can afford doing that because he's written so many classic songs. So if he mentioned one stinker, nobody will care.
And that was going to be in my list.
Sorry.
Yeah, because I would love to hear from Paul and Mark. I apologize going out of order here, but stuff like Best Man for You, some of these demos Paul did in the late 80s, some of which were apparently or allegedly, purportedly geared towards someone like Cher. I would love for him to talk about those, why they didn't end up being used within a Kiss context. So Best Man for You, When Two Hearts Collide.
Sword and Stone?
Sort of, yeah, that as well, So maybe some of the songs that didn't make it onto the Kiss albums, It's My Life, from his perspective, and I know he's kind of said in interviews, that was more Gene's song. But, David also, touched on a really good point of having him talk about, some of the kind of historic moments that stand out to him, like that Brazil and the heaving mass of South American metal maniacs. I mean, it would be great to hear from him kind of reminiscing about stuff that maybe was left out of Face the Music or Backstage Pass or, just some of the things that he'd like to talk about. So, the scope is there for a whole lot of things. Now, David touched on, what makes the world go round, and I'm like, brilliant, mate. That is, I love to hear or even see him play a verse and a little bit of a chorus of a song that's never ever going to be performed by Kiss. So that would be awesome. But I also agree with Daniel that the 80s. Well, I think Bruce is covering the 80s very well. So I'm kind of mixed and conflicted about whether I'd want him, stepping on Bruce's toes, talking strictly about that. So, Sure Knows Something or Magic Touch, off Dynasty, anything that he's written would be great. And I would love to hear about an unreleased Paul song from the 1970s. So Don't You Hesitate, which obviously was on the box, and just to give us the context of that. But you know what? I'm also thoroughly happy if Paul just does it his way. Because right now he's done Love Gun, he's gone into Every Time I Look at You, so he's talked about Bob Ezrin and, that era. He seems to be picking very well from the wheelhouse of what he wants to talk about that I'm finding interesting. I love the format that he's doing. I might like a little bit less playing and more talking, but he's not filling the air with unnecessary stuff, which is nice. Mark, what are your thoughts on it and some of your picks?
Well, I think I'm going to start off by saying that I think that what he's doing is really good, really essential. I know a lot of Kiss fans that I see on Facebook are already starting to, bounce off walls and pulling their hair out for whatever reason. So, having him come on there is something that people are starting to look forward to now. When's the next Paul thing going to come up so I can check it out? And I find that his presentation of it is very soothing. I find him very comforting for whatever reason, that when I hear him talking, it sounds very reassuring. And when he's talking about, even when he talks about, staying home and, acknowledging the first responders and stuff like that, I always get this feeling that when it comes out of Paul's mouth, that the Kiss community takes it much more seriously. That, it's like almost like an authoritative voice, like, your older brother going, listen, don't screw around here. And when Paul says it, he kind of sit up a little bit more straighter and acknowledge it a little bit more than if Gene said it with Gene. You're like, yeah, whatever, that's Gene, what does he know, So I kind of get it that his thing is very good in that way. I've enjoyed some of his playing. I think it's not really necessary for him to try to belt out the songs. I mean, even if he just sang it in normal voice, I think people would love it. You're just there to kind of show the song. It doesn't have to be, Grammy award-winning performance on here to do it, right? Just play it and let people know the story behind it. I mean, I would have liked to hear some of the stuff from the solo records a little bit more, like, Wouldn't You Like to Know Me, I think is a good song to talk about. I also think I'd like to hear something from Unmasked, like maybe Tomorrow. Like, what was the impetus on that? Like, what was he thinking of when he was writing that? Was he going in thinking pop material? Was he thinking, something different? And even the Asylum. I mean, we all know that me and Julian, we love that album. That's like our favorite out of makeup album. And I think that, songs like Who Wants to Be Lonely, he could whip out a couple of parts in that and just talk about what was he thinking when he wrote it? Why did he write it? That to me is such an important record to me. I'd love to hear a little bit of a background on that. And I know there's other people out there that want to do it as well. But the great thing is, because we have such a long, we're suspecting there's going to be a long period of sitting at home still ahead. He has a lot of great songs you can go through, and I'm sure a lot of great stories as well to go through. So the internet now, while, before there was a group of people, whether they were older people like our parents and stuff, they're always saying, you get off that phone. It's such a, you're sticking your nose in the phone for too long, or you're on the internet too long. Now, we should be very happy that we have it, because in these times when people don't know what to do with themselves, maybe this is the thing that's keeping them from not going bonkers.
Yep, exactly. David, if Tommy, Eric, or Gene were to do something similar in like a roughly 5-minute kind of spot, talking about their music or maybe showing instruments or whatever, what would you like to see from them? What would you enjoy and help pass your time in isolation from them?
Well, Gene, it's a bit difficult because he did all the vault stuff, so he kind of did that. I'm trying to sort of think, what he could add that would be different to his vault appearances, where he did precisely that, telling stories and doing versions and that sort of thing. But I would like to know about some things like, where did She come from? I know it's Wicked Lester and him and Steve Cornell, but I don't think I've known much of a backstory about that sort of thing. So yeah, more of that. With Eric and Tommy, a bit difficult, particularly with Eric, because he's only kind of sings on 2 of his own songs, if you know what I mean. But I would love for him to maybe do a sit down at the kit thing and show us all how to do the Detroit Rock City Shuffle, because I've never worked that out. How that, I mean, and maybe some of his favourite Kiss or Alice Cooper tracks to play. What does he enjoy playing? Because obviously when he joined the band, he had to play a certain set, but there must be songs where each time it comes round, he thinks, this great playing this. It's that would be good. And Tommy, get ready for the hate mail. But I love Out of This World. I love it. I don't know why. I think it's a cracking song. I think it's really, really cool. And it'd be good to. What I'd like to know is what songs caused him the biggest headache to learn when he had to join, like the solo for Forever.
Creatures of the Night.
I mean, he must have sat on his bed working that one out for hours. Do you know what I mean? It's a tricky one. That I've never heard anyone play it quite as well as Bruce, but I'd be interested to know someone like him, Tommy, who's an extremely good guitar player. There must have been some where, wow, that's a bit of a tricky one, because Ace, as you know, one of the reasons we like Ace is because he didn't really play by the rules. It's sort of he'd just go tearing off. I mean, I've tried to play the solo for Rocket Ride, and it's a corker, but it's not easy. It's not easy, But so yeah, that's what I'd like. Is it'd be nice if Eric and Tommy, for instance, their perspective is so cool. I think coming in from outside, and what things freaked them out. There must have been quite a few moments where they just had sort of jaw-dropping, sort of I can't believe I'm actually doing this moments. And but like I say, with Gene, it's a bit difficult because I watched all the videos that came up with the Vault stuff and what have you, and that was fascinating. So it'd just be more of that, really. Sorry to be dull on that one.
Yeah, well, done that, got the T-shirt. Forget it, Gene.
Yeah. Actually, what you said, rolling back a few minutes and what have you, you said about what makes the world go round, and that's a brilliant suggestion, because I do love that song, and it is. What I actually said, I think, is "Wouldn't You Like to Know Me?" But yeah, what makes the world go round It was a single in this country. Why was it a single in this country? Do you know what I mean? I wonder why they picked that for the UK with a picture of Ace on the front, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't think we'd get answers for that sort of.
No, I don't think he even knows why that, and it was probably just phonogram said, you know, where, especially when they were in flux. But that, you know, again, you know, the point's taken that stories, you know, about anything would be interesting. Daniel, what about you with the other three members of current KISS?
Well, and as you said, David, Gene has told a lot of stories about the songwriting, but there's one area that I would like him to, you know, go in depth, and that's movies. You know, Gene is a movie buff. He likes a lot of old, you know, detective movies, black and white. It would be nice to see him go in depth on movies and do like a top 5. I don't know, his top 5 actors, his top 5 movies, or specify a genre that he enjoy, like horror films. What are the best horror films that he's seen, and maybe tell some anecdotes from his own movie career. You know,
top 5 Polaroids, perhaps.
Yeah, that might be. But I'd actually like him to talk about movies, because he seems to know a whole lot about old films and movies. So that would be kind of interesting. Eric, of course, I would like to hear him talk about when he first joined KISS in '92. That first tour, you know, the club tour, the tour of England, and I think they played Wales, Scotland, maybe. And then they went on the stadium tour in America. What were his impressions of the fans, and was he surprised by how KISS fans were, or and some anecdotes from you know, the life on tour? He is actually delivered in great ways in many interviews. I think he's if he gets the correct questions, he answers them. It's not like Paul and Gene, who's so, you know, like politically correct all the time. Eric can go off on a tangent and talk about whatever. So I think it would be real nice to hear him talk about that specific tour, mostly because that's when I was like at my KISS echelon, or at the height of my KISS fandom. So it would be real nice. Tommy, I don't know. He seems like such a nice guy. You just want to sit down and, you know, have a beer with him and have a nice time. It's almost like he's too nice, you know. He wouldn't. It wouldn't be very exciting, I think, but who knows? So Gene about movies and Eric about the Revenge Tour. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I think Tommy could surprise some fans with stuff that he could talk about. Mark, you know, what's your thought on this?
Well, I agree. I think Gene has been, up to this point, probably one of the most active people on YouTube and stuff like that. So, you know, we already know quite a lot about different things, whether it's songs or stuff like that. One thing I would love to see him do a little bit more, which he doesn't do because he's always said that he's not one of those type of guys, is that I'd love to see him pull out some of his instruments. You know, pull out your old pedula bass from, you know, back in the Asylum days, you know, or pull out some of your older, you know, instruments that you have, and, you know, show them off a little bit, talk about them a bit, you know, how Paul showed the Martin guitar a little bit, you know, pull out some of your stuff that you have in your collection. You know, he has some stuff. There's got to be some stuff. You know, even pull out some of your old bass amps or something if you have something, and talk about it. I think, to me, that's, as a musician, I'm sure David too would be probably interested in that. Even Daniel too, obviously being a musician as well, would be interested in that. Even you too, Julian, you're a musician. You would be interested probably in that kind of stuff as well. He's seeing different instruments and stuff like that. As for Eric, one thing I would love to see, and I think David touched on this briefly, is, you know, get him like a kick and a snare and a hi-hat, and just get him to go through some parts that he's played, maybe some of his favorite drum parts through KISS history. One thing I'd love for him to talk about, because I noticed this as I did my look through different KISS videos throughout the years, when he joined KISS, he took songs and completely modified them to much more modernized versions, like Detroit Rock City, and even Deuce was a lot more, he made them a lot more active and stuff. And then you notice that when they started doing tours like, you know, Alive 35 and stuff like that, all of a sudden he had a slightly smaller kit. He wasn't going so crazy on the kick drum anymore. They kind of rolled him back a bit. They kind of put the leash on him a bit and said, whoa. We need you to play this a little bit more like how Peter played it. And I'd like to talk about that. If they actually sat him down and said, listen, we don't want you to go so, 2002 on this. We need you to play a little 70s, So, and I'd also like him to talk about, maybe what are some of the drum patterns, the original drum patterns that he likes, and what drum patterns did he not like, and try to kind of modify more to his style. That's the kind of thing I've always loved to know about him, is what did you take and kind of said, you know what, I hope they don't notice, but I'm going to throw in a couple of extra kick hits here, or maybe throw in an extra roll here and there. What did he turn into Eric Singer drumming and not Peter Criss drumming, or even Eric Carr drumming? You know what I mean? Talk about that. That's one thing I always loved about people in Yes. Like whenever they had a different keyboard player come in, they do an interview with them, and he'd always talk about, oh, I love the way this guy played keyboards because he did this, or I love the way he did this because he did this. What does Eric like about the other drummers? What does he dislike? Come on, 40 years, there should be no shame in talking about it now. As for Tommy, I think that I'd love to hear about some of the Psycho Circus stuff, because we know that he was involved in it. We know there's solos that he did that were not credited to him. There you go. And, maybe talk about those now. I mean, it's no secret anymore that he was involved in it, so there's nothing to hide. Maybe talk about some of the favorite solos that he did that maybe still some people might not be aware of, And I think that, like you said, Julian, Tommy could probably surprise us with a lot of the stuff that he knows and that he could talk about. And maybe he hasn't talked about it because maybe people haven't asked him about it. Maybe they don't think that he knows about certain things. He might surprise a lot of people.
There's a pretty good article on Tommy Thayer in Sweden Rock magazine. It's like almost 10 pages where he goes through, his history with the band. Kind of interesting, but he always seemed to keep in mind that his employers are Paul and Gene a bit, and he should as well. So he doesn't tell it all, of course, but it's a real good interview. Unfortunately, there is no English version of it, so you guys probably
Google Translate.
Yeah. Works.
Well, I think Mark had a really good point there with the Gene thing. Because one of the things that just kind of frustrates me about Gene Simmons is that when anybody asks him about his bass playing and stuff like that, he just kind of glosses over it. He's not interested in talking about it. And yet, I just think, anyone who's worn a pair of headphones while listening to Kiss stuff, he's a fantastic bass player. And like you say, it'd be interesting to hear, does he still have any of his old sort of SVT heads and all that sort of stuff? Does he still, but really the playing, it's like I've seen people try and compliment him in interview or try and get him onto the subject of his instrument, and he'll carry on just trotting out the whole sort of, we wear high heels and more makeup than your mama and all this sort of stuff. It's like, look, just, I think he's a great musician. It's frustrating because I think he's very underrated as a bass player. To play those sort of lines and run about and sing, that's a talent right there.
Yeah, I think all three of you covered some very good ideas and suggestions for each one of these guys, so that doesn't give me a lot of places to go. I know from my conversation interviewing both Tommy and Eric for the Aerosmith book that Eric would be very, very good. Well, actually, my number one thing, I'd love to see him try and do it in 5 minutes and limit himself to 5 minutes. That would be pure entertainment. But Eric's a talker. And he has such a deep musical knowledge, and I think I've mentioned previously on this and other shows that, he was schooling me on Queen. Yeah, and his knowledge, obviously he worked with Brian May, of bands in the 70s, his appreciation for bands in the 70s would be a nice way for him to step outside the Kiss box. I'd like for him to do maybe his top 3 Alice Cooper albums and his top 3 Kiss albums, his favorite albums, growing up, talking about, Deep Purple. We started having a conversation twice about Deep Purple. And, I think he's got a lot to say about these albums, both from a performance point of view as a drummer and just as a fan of music. The ESP album was a great representation of a lot of the music that he likes and other of those participants liked. And I think he can share a lot of really fun things about that without talking about Kiss. Maybe talk, Icebreaker, arriving in LA. doing the Olivia Newton-John video, working with Lita, working with Tony and Lita, and then transitioning into Black Sabbath and talking about those albums that he performed on. Talk about Ray Gillen, Badlands. Talk about doing the demo sessions with Ian Astbury and Billy Duffy, for the Cult Sonic Temple album. There is so much that he can talk about with music. Talk about working with Brian May on the Nelson Mandela concert. Lots of stuff like that. And you've covered also, how he approached drumming stuff that had been performed by Eric Carr or Peter Criss, and, what he adapted and what he changed. That stuff would be really fun and fascinating too. So Eric would be awesome from that, just because of his musical passion. Tommy Thayer has the exact same musical passion for a lot of the bands that we all grew up with and appreciated. So I think similar for him. But I'd also like Tommy to talk about, working with Gene in the studio, telling just stories from those experiences. And obviously he worked with Bruce Fairbairn in Black and Blue, and then again for Psycho Circus. So that's a nice contrast between two bands and the same producer. His favorite Kiss songs to play, his favorite solos. What is that one solo that he performs night after night after night that he gets the most satisfaction out of nailing, or when he comes off stage and he's just like, really enjoyed performing it? Is it the same? Is there one that challenges him more than another? Talk about the reunion and the role that he fulfilled, and expand on what it was like to, help Ace relearn his material, and some of the things that have become somewhat legendary from him working with the band. That would be really interesting. Set the scene for maybe, one day down the road there might be a Tommy Thayer autobiography. Give us a little tease into that. Some of the other bands that he toured with. Obviously I had some nice Aerosmith tour stories. Obviously Black and Blue opened for them on the Back in the Saddle tour in 1984-85. So he's got a dearth of really good stories that I'm sure he could tell without offending anyone. He's got a dearth of great music that he's been a part of creating in Black and Blue and in Kiss that he can talk about. So that'd be interesting. Gene. All right, I think Gene's comic book collection, if he has one, and movie collection would really be the most interesting thing. I disagree vehemently with David. I don't care that he has already done acoustic songs and stories. There are a lot more songs and stories which I would love Gene to kind of approach, and it's all the stuff that didn't make it onto the vault. To just kind of pick up the acoustic and strum some of that stuff, and he did that with Jelle. The Dutch vault session where he played a song that was demoed but didn't make the vault, and he actually played some of it. This is a guy who can't remember the lyrics to Kiss song playing a song he probably hasn't even heard in 40 years. I mean, just go figure. But I think Gene's top 10 horror movies would be really, really fun. And I don't watch horror movies, but I'd be really interested to know what he liked about each one of these. Gene's, shows that he watched as a young immigrant to America that helped him learn the language, and to tell us about each one of those and the ones that he loved. His radio shows or maybe even for him to pop out copies of his fanzines, digital copies of his fanzines for us to read, on Twitter. That would be really fun. And for him then to talk about each one, each issue that he's sharing that day in a short segment would be very entertaining. But you know what? It's easy for me to spend other people's time, just like it's easy to spend other people's, money. But moving on from that kind of thing, what do you think the band can do at this time of struggle? And this applies to many bands to, keep their fans engaged at a time that they're canceling and rescheduling shows, that product is being delayed. What are some of the things that you'd like to see Kiss as an entity, or maybe other bands do while we're all confined? Mark, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, I thought about this, and I think one of the things that is really doing good for a lot of bands is the use of YouTube, and just doing, in-home performances. I've seen, quite a few different ones now. Dave Grohl did one. There was tell of, I think Elton John did some kind of piano performance in his living room or something. Those kind of things are going to be interesting because people, I think, are starving for live performance because they can't go and see shows now. So even something as rudimentary as that might, get a lot of people's attention. One thing that's happening right now that I think is brilliant, and of course, once again, the band that we love to hate in the 2000s, but now seems to show their genius, Metallica, are putting up every week, full concerts to watch on YouTube from their catalog, like whole professionally shot stuff they're showing on YouTube for people to watch. I mean, unbelievable that they're going out to do that, I mean, a lot of people would absolutely die if Kiss did that. Like, oh, here's a show that we filmed back in '77 from so on and so forth, and we're just going to show it,
78 Tokyo.
Yeah.
or the other thing that I would love to see them do, and this came immediately into my mind when I saw this question like posed for a topic today, is I remember there was a post, and I think you talked about it, Julian, how Paul Stanley found a cassette somewhere in the warehouse of some old performance of something, maybe an old live thing. Was it Wicked Lester or Rainbow or something like that?
Yeah, it was a Wicked Lester acoustic or a rehearsal reel that we still haven't found the status of.
Or how about this? Pull that out, go on YouTube and announce that, next week, Friday at 7:00 Eastern, we're going to do a live, listen to it. Like he's going to whip it on to the reel-to-reel machine, and I'm going to do a live listen to the whole thing beginning to end for all the Kiss fans, come on to YouTube, and we're going to listen to this first time in 45 or 50 years. Many people would probably crash YouTube for that, if people heard that they were going to play stuff like that. I think these are the kind of things that bands could take full advantage of now. Like pull out, dust off some of this stuff that you have in your closet, because the fans would probably love to hear this. You know what I mean? I'm kind of hoping secretly that people like Geddy Lee or Alex might do that, in tribute to Neil, maybe pull out an old show from '77, and show a great concert where Neil had a fantastic drum solo that night or something, and play it in its entirety, and maybe even do commentary about it while you're listening to it. People would love to hear that stuff. That's one of the things I loved about Kissology, was listening to the commentary track while watching it, hearing their thoughts about it. Could you imagine listening to that old concert performance of Wicked Lester or whatever, and having Paul narrate to it, saying, oh, I remember when we did this is when so and so did that. I think it would just be brilliant. So that's one of the things I think that they can take full advantage of. Use the YouTube and these kind of mediums and really quench the fans' thirst for stuff that we haven't heard.
There are a lot of pro shot alive worldwide shows purportedly, and there are obviously quite a few shows that have been filmed since 2004. Like Monterey pops out, whether they actually were or not, they did say they were filming them, but there's so many problems, no doubt, with doing what Metallica does. Anyone know what the Metallica showed yesterday?
Yeah, Paris 2017.
Oh, nice. Okay, I got to catch up. Daniel, what's your take on that?
Well, Mark had a lot of great ideas. I mean, just going through the vault, showing stuff, just bringing a camera and going through and picking up stuff, that would be awesome. But a kind of a wet dream I have is I would actually like to see a few of the members do some sort of podcast like this. That would be so beautiful. Having preferably Paul and Gene as the main guys, of course. I always like the dynamics between Paul and Gene, both trying to be the top dog, trying to be the pack leader, kind of riffing off each other. And then bringing in guests, like Michael James Jackson, Desmond Child, or even have all 4 band members in a discussion. And then they could just go through our topic lists, top 3 albums, the top 3 songs, go in depth on a record, Monster, the recording, well, maybe not Monster, but one of the other albums. And, go in deep together and discuss and have fun. And, that would be awesome to see. That would be the podcast of podcasts. And preferably with Paul and Gene, of course, and different guests coming on. That would be great.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, but it will never happen. But
Maybe not, but
Yeah.
hope.
You can still
Rebellions
dream.
are built on hope.
Yes.
That's true.
David Donnelly, what are your thoughts?
Well, the reason I was grinning all the way through Mark's thing is he was pretty much word for word saying what I was going to say, which was, when I saw this was one of the topics, I did think to myself, wouldn't it be great if they just sort of, wrestled a few concerts out of the vault? And then last night, I was just, having a YouTube watch of various things, and I just suddenly, I have to admit, I'm not a big Metallica fan, but I suddenly saw this thing pop up and it said Metallica live now, but the date was, Paris 2017. So I thought, okay. So I clicked on it, and then I realised what they were doing. They were streaming a gig, like a full live gig, and I watched about 3 or 4 songs of it, and I just thought, that's exactly what they should be doing. And the second thing I was going to say, which Mark also said, was I really enjoyed on the Kissology DVDs. I love the audio commentary that they did on some things like the Sydney show and things like that, but they kind of dipped in and out a bit much. But I mean, and to use Daniel's phrase, it will never happen. But I mean, I'd love to hear Gene and Paul do a commentary track for Kiss Meets the Phantom. Just be great.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically Mark answered for me, but we're obviously on the same lines there. But I just thought, and I didn't know that until last night, I didn't realise that's what Metallica were doing. And so it's not because I'm a fan that I was able to answer your question, it's because I sort of fell over it last night as I was looking at other stuff on YouTube. And I just thought, what a brilliant idea, because it's I couldn't work out whether it's the cameras from the screens or whether it's like they just pro shoot tons of gigs, but it was a good production, and it's really good. I think I must have caught the encores because it was all the songs I knew. But yeah, that's a great idea. So that just
Did you watch the Hot in the Shade show that Julian and Andrew?
Yes, I did.
I
did. That was great. Again, that's great. That's one of my little notes that I put down there was like do an intro to a live gig from the vaults, a la Andrew Scambetti. That sort of Scambetti, sorry. But that sort of thing. I wonder if they could just sling together some vintage stuff or get Andrew to do it. I'm sure he'd be happy to do that. He's a decent editor.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a way of pulling this stuff together. We've got they've got the army behind them, so they should use it.
Yeah, and again, it really does come back to that for me. Again, we know of all these pro shots that were done, so I would just love to see those being thrown up. They're disposable. They're not the sort of thing that could really ever be sold. And when they were on Kissology and you had the Detroit reunion show on there with all the black spots of when they weren't using the screens and everything, that's not really commercially viable material. Get it out there, get it out there semi-officially as well. Toledo circulates. What else circulates? The Eddie Cannon show, circulates. Stuff like that. I would love to, see some, just anything. The response to the video that Andrew edited, when we streamed it the 3 times, we always knew it was going to be a risk that someone would capture it, and that we were perfectly fine with that. We talked about it before we ever showed any of it, that are we okay if someone does eventually? Yeah. So it's out there on YouTube now, and someone did capture it, and boom, it's on YouTube, and that's perfectly fine. It's not in the quality that I have sitting on a DVD here. I don't like it being sold, so the band has to accept that if they do anything, it has to be something that they don't mind a bootlegger selling, because otherwise, just don't do it. Don't put anything out there that you wouldn't accept that someone is going to then monetize, because you just don't get butthurt about it, in other words, because it's going to happen. Simple as that. Okay. I like the idea of the KISS official podcast. I think Keith would be a great host of that, and be able to get all 5 or 4 of them, to on the same show. It could just be comedy time, or maybe Tommy and Eric separately, Gene and Paul, or combinations of whatever to talk about topics, and let the fans pick the topic. So that, you're not going to necessarily get an hour. You might get 10 minutes, might even be only 5. But if we can record a Skype call on video, certainly I would think that they could, and take the topics from, have people submit them to KISS Online, and then present it to a panel of members of KISS, or even guests. Bruce Kulick. Imagine that. Yeah? Maybe even who. Ace or Peter. Have them call in to the official KISS podcast. It would be fun. It'd probably put the rest of the KISS shows out of business, because if KISS is doing it from the horse's mouth, what the heck? Well, no. Okay, that's stupid. You're not putting us out of business. All right, let's move into a couple topics from the board, because there have been a couple of kind of interesting ones in the past week. And I'm not going to go in order, because I think we'll come back and do some of these other ones on another occasion, because we're getting close to our preferred hour mark. But Gene didn't write rock and roll hell was a topic. And I'm like, duh. But it raises the question, what other sort of KISS revelations have you found shocking over the years, and that made you maybe shake your head and sadly mutter, wow? So stuff that maybe came out that really disappointed you or shocked you, or you're really excited to learn about. David, let's start with you.
Well, I thought of a good. I'll go for a good revelation. Let's keep it positive. Firstly, which was I was a big fan of Marriage with Children, the TV series. Do you know that? I don't suppose Daniel knows. Oh, do you do?
Yeah, I've seen it.
So when I found out that Katie Segal sang on Gene's album, because I'd seen that, I didn't hook it up until well into that sort of thing. But I remember thinking, oh, that's cool. That was a cool thing. So
he did more than sing on his album, from what I know.
I'm sure. And it's a nice little thing too. My other half is really into Sons of Anarchy, and she loves Katie Segal's character in that. And I was quite chuffed with myself when I was managed to turn to her and just say, she sang on Gene Simmons' solo album. She goes, get the fuck out of it, But yeah, it's true. So that was a good revelation that I didn't put together until a long, long time on there. But to be honest, it is. I seem to have been getting my hooks into Gene really this episode, unfortunately. But it is that sort of stop telling us about how much money you've made and how many women you've slept with. I really would love to hear more about the musical side, because it is a bit of a repeat. And that's when I shake my head, is when I watch an interview, I think, oh, cool, great, a new Gene interview, and then it's just the same sound bites coming over. It's just like that. They must know that people like us watch everything. Do you know what I mean? So there's bound to be repeats, and I suppose there's those sort of things. But to be honest, it's like my timeline with KISS was coming in at around just before Dynasty, or Dynasty, depending on who's. And so because it was Dynasty, Unmasked, The Elder, and all that sort of stuff, I thought that KISS was just a band that just did different stuff every album, and then I went backwards, and oh god, they're a dirty rock and roll band as well. I like this, and so to me they haven't really disappointed me until, like I say, latter day with Gene just. I can walk into this room and leave with your girlfriend. No, you can't. You're 70 and you're married. Just stop talking like that. It's kind of embarrassing. He's like that embarrassing uncle that that sits in the corner at parties. But that's not to say that I don't think, like I said before, he's a genius bass player, and what he and Paul created, and Ace and Peter is beyond my little silly little points, but yeah, I just like it's now it's the end of the road. and all that sort of stuff. It would be cool if they recognise themselves. That to people like me, maybe not everyone, they are a musical force. So when they go down the road of talking about all the sort of, the stuff around it and what have you, it's not. I just sort of think, just tell us about the music. That's what I'm into, because it is a musical force, Kiss, for me.
Yep, exactly. Mark, what about revelations that have shocked you over the years, or made you go wow?
Shock me.
Well, I mean, when I was much younger, obviously, when you first learn about stuff like, Peter Criss not drumming on Dynasty, at first you're kind of like, oh, wow, I can't believe that. And then, even back in those times, you think about, wow, then you find out that Ace did very minimal work on Psycho Circus, and you're kind of like, wow, I can't believe that. But I think the thing that really surprised me, and I don't know how many people will find this really surprising, maybe you have to be a guy that, loves recording studios, I think David might have a little bit of a chuckle at this one too, is the thing that always shocked me was I love C.K. Lent's book, okay, Kiss and Sell, I believe it's called.
Brilliant, yes.
And I love reading that book. And one of the stories in there that just really made me slap my forehead with my hand was reading the story about Ace when they finally got that huge contract after Dynasty, and he bought that house in Connecticut, and they came up to Ace and said, we have a great idea for you, Ace, for a nice, beautiful 8-track studio in your basement. It'll cost maybe 20, 30 grand. It's great. You can do all kinds of professional little recordings in your basement. And he was all for it. And then a couple of weeks later, it turned into what they called the White Elephant, where it turned into a 24-track gigantic monstrosity that became so big that and because it was so big, they were not able to get a commercial license. It was not sectored for that to do it. So really, he could only just record himself in there. He couldn't bring other bands in there. That wasn't permitted to do it because he was in residential area. And to drop all this money into the studio only to have him just sell this house a couple of years later, that to me almost made me cry when I read that. I was like, really Ace, are you I just wanted to go and just grab him and wedge him when I read that story. It's like, come on, man. I mean, people like me and David, and even I'm sure Daniel would love a studio like that in his house, or Julian would love to have a place like that to go run to and record, and to have the funds to be able to do it, and then squander all this and have to give up it really upsets me. I mean, I love studios. I mean, I'm happy with my little small boards I have here, and that I can do all stuff thanks to technology. But man, when I saw pictures of that studio later on in magazines, when they showed it with that big picture, everybody must have saw that picture with Ace with all those guitars in there. And then they showed the MCI board that he had and all this stuff. I was like, oh my God. I was just like, this is like for me, it would be like heaven. You could have, if Corona happened and I had that, you can just put a padlock on the front of the door for the next 7 months, and I would be happy to stay in there and never come out, and just to hear that all of that was gone from him within 2 years, maybe it was gone, that house already by that point. It just was absolutely heartbreaking. That to me is shocking.
Yeah, and you can rest assured that whoever bought that house immediately turned the studio into a wine cellar or something.
Yeah, they said they didn't do it. They gutted it and turned it into a family room or something. They said,
stuck a pool table in it. Yeah.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think he actually had the house until '86, but didn't live there. So, go figure. Oh my God. But maybe someone else knows more about that. I know that the house certainly has modern history now. Daniel, what makes you go, wow?
Well, the topic was Gene didn't write Rock and Roll Hell. I remember, when Kiss did covers, they always stuck out a bit. Kiss in Time, and Then She Kissed Me. What else? New York Groove on Ace's album. It didn't really sound like Kiss, but there was one song that I always thought Kiss had done by themselves. And then I was shocked learning that some other guy wrote it, and it was King of the Nighttime World. It was such a perfect Kiss song. So I was really surprised and shocked when I learned that they hadn't written that one, but it's a good one. But otherwise, when I was a kid, I guess you were a bit naive. And one big shock was when I understood that my band consisted of 2 employers and 2 employees. I mean, that was a shock. You looked at the band like this force to be reckoned with, a group. They went out in the streets and they were together and were best friends. I guess we all had this experience. And I remember drawing a lot when I was a kid, drawing Kiss in the street, beating up band members from Dio and Twisted Sister and Wasp, going there in the street together. And then I learned, well, it's Paul and Gene, and the other ones are just being paid by them. And it was a big shock to me. So I think that's my biggest shock when I was like 13.
Yeah, there's been a lot of shocks for me, especially delving into the history and of all that side of things. But I think one of the ones that really made me scratch my head was when I found out that Bruce Kulick had actually been replaced with a session player on Every Time I Look at You. And maybe that's just because Paul did the song last night that's popped into my head, which always amazed me that Dick Wagner did that solo. So just Bruce Kulick being replaced just strikes me as a sentence that does not compute.
Well, I didn't know that, so that's a new one on me.
So, yeah, and it wasn't because he was out playing cards. So, I think it shouldn't surprise you, because they replaced, obviously they did 2 albums without Peter, with Anton. They did all those songs with one member playing bass, that you assume is Gene, and it's not. It wasn't uncommon once we start discovering the history. They had Alan Schwartzberg coming in the 80s for both, Animalize and Asylum to do drum overdubs, we need more hi-hat. Well, you got the guy in the studio just hitting a hi-hat to add it in. So, but Bruce getting replaced is just I still shake my head at that. It's like, of any player who's been with the band, he would be the last one I would expect to have ever been subbed out for something whatsoever.
And it doesn't sound like anything, like when you listen to it, what was played by Dick Wagner, it doesn't sound like anything that was out of his, skill set or feel set, let alone. I mean, I think I've heard Bruce play solos similar to that dozens of times. So like, what was, was it just a situation where they had a solo, they maybe thought, it could have been done better, and they didn't want to wait like till tomorrow to have Bruce come in and replace it, and just had Dick do it right away? I mean, you might know that better than obviously I would, but why would they have done that?
Well, I think you're right, and I'll just update my answer, which is not so much revelation, but the disappointment of the times where they pulled the wool over our eyes, or tried to anyway. When I first heard Psycho Circus, I could tell that Peter Criss wasn't playing a great deal on it and stuff. But what annoys me, again, someone who's been in the studio a lot of time, and as a producer as well, I've produced bands where maybe the drummer wasn't quite as sharp, but I'll just spend extra time with him. And certainly in modern day recording and stuff, you can get through. I still think that was one of the worst ones, because we all felt this was going to be the 4 original members doing an album together and getting back on track. And I was so looking forward to it, and just the nonsense that I could hear through the headphones of this being Paul, Peter, Ace, and Gene, and it clearly wasn't, and I just think, because there was so much hanging on it, I just think a producer like Bruce Fairbairn, they could have done it, they could have pulled it together. I think they should have made more effort to have done it as a 4-piece, and and all this stuff about, they weren't playing as well, that sort of stuff. No, they're playing like they play. They play like, that's why we like them.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's having the wool pulled over your eyes a lot, and thinking that people like us who really do watch and really do listen and take it all in, like we wouldn't spot it.
Yeah.
But
well, On that positive note, let's leave it there. We'll come back and revisit some of these other unused topics from today's show, because, you know, that's a good amount for people to digest for today. So, au revoir. Let's say from Mark, from David, from Daniel and myself, thanks for watching. And remember, stay away from each other, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for spending time listening to the KissFAQ podcast today. All sales are final, there are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the KissFAQ message board and discuss the topic we've broadcast today. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes, Spreaker, or wherever you've listened to the show. We hope you'll join us again.